0.4% in January of 25. Roughly, the economy added 143,000 in January. It's a decline from the previous 2 months, but on average, 2024, we had roughly 166,000 jobs. So that's very much in line with what the full employment economy would look like. Nebraska, specifically, unemployment rate is 2.8% in December. This is a couple percent, 0.2% higher than the last time we talked. Moody forecast for the Nebraska unemployment rate to remain roughly at 2.8 for the remainder of their forecast horizon, which carry out to 2029. The assumption for the U.S. macroeconomics that we built into this forecast come from S&P, GMI, and Moody. If you look at the table on the top there, that's the real GDP growth on an annual basis for the next until 2029. One difference that you can see is S&P does have a lower trajectory in the out year compared to Moody, with the exception of 2026. Same thing with unemployment rate. S&P tend to have higher unemployment rate. As you can see, that's drive the GDP number also. So it's basically very in line with the story they're telling. Moody, on the other hand, keep their unemployment rate roughly 4.2 max out in 2027, and pretty much hover around that percentage point. In terms of monetary policy assumption for the two major services that we use. So the Fed cut 3 times in 2024, take the rate down by a full 1 percentage point. S&P assumption is one more cut in 2025, which happen in May or June meeting. And then they will hold that steady until the middle of 2026. On Moody, on the other hand, they assume 2 rate cuts in 25, and the rate will go toward the 3% rate by the end of 2026. So it's a slower cut in rate compared to last time we assumption from last economic forecast. And consumer price, I expect to remain elevated this time around. S&P 2.9% for 2025, that's a monthly average. 3% in 26 before reaching 2.4 in 2027. Moody, similarly 2.7 for 25, and will not go to 2% until 2029. And down the bottom there, you can see the breakdown quarter on an annualized rate basis. You can see the same elevated inflation throughout the forecast horizon. Here's the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia Business Index that we put together every time, just to compare the growth rate of basically the United States overall compared to Nebraska, which is the red line. We basically seen the growth rate of the two very similarly, so nothing to discuss there. This is a slide where this shows the Nebraska non-motor vehicle net taxable sales. This is directly related to sales tax. You can see the last part here, it starts to go flat, but then at the last few months, it starts to increase a little bit. Basically, if you look at the whole graph, then what you see is this is before the pandemic. It's running along very stable. This is where right after the pandemic, where a lot of money being spent, government stimulus, things like that. But then this is where it's kind of cut off, and I think it's start basically going back to pre-pandemic spending trend. And that previous graph, you can also see it from here. This is the breakdown. This is Moody projection of Nebraska consumption expenditure. You can see the red line here is non-durable. That's basically taxable sales plus durable. You see it start flat, and then that's the pandemic period. Then it starts flat again. So it's just forecast going back to pre-pandemic day. This is showing the Nebraska non-farm payroll employment in Nebraska. Increased nicely until the last couple of months where we actually losing, I don't remember the specific number, but like a couple thousand jobs, something like that for the last couple of months. Hopefully the trend will pick back up. So that's the overall economic forecast and assumption. This shows the fiscal year to date comparison to the forecast that we just did back in October. You can see sale and use tax very much on target with the forecast back in October. Individual income tax, we run about 50 million higher. Corporate income tax, we run about 170 million higher. That mainly is the PTET money in December. Miscellaneous, we run right on target. And that's basically for July to January. This is the best we can come up with for February. Sale and use tax, again, kind of on target, about 5 million behind. Individual income tax, we're going to see it now about 35 million running behind. That's just refund is running higher than projected. Corporate income tax, we are running 39 million behind. Again, you can see corporate income tax refund start to get elevated. That's negative to the net. So all in all, the month we are expecting about 94 million decline. So if you take this, add back to 224 in the previous slide, that gives you what, 130ish.
Can you put the previous slide up just for a second?
So the previous slide, we are showing 224 million higher up to January. And then if you take that and add on roughly 90 million to that, that gives you roughly 130 million-ish. We are running over right now. But again, a lot of that PTET might have refund coming implication that coming out.
So when we look at those refunds, the individual income tax, would that be reflecting the PTET?
No, this is mainly the PTET population, if you will, are not the February tax filer. They all tend to be later, April, May, October-ish.
So what's causing the refund up there?
The refund running higher, well, one obvious reason is the projection might have been low, right? But also I believe this year the IRS opened a little bit earlier than previous year, so we have more processing cycle. People file the tax earlier because the IRS opened their tax season on the 25th of January. So I think that's a little bit earlier than on a year, and that's the best I can.
What's the middle category there?
That's so this is the forecast on the cash flow that based on October forecast. This is what we expected. This is what actually came in. I put estimate up here just because we're not finalized yet.
I know, but it says October total, so it's really February total.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
It
That's
is
why I was
February.
getting confused.
It is February, so
Okay.
yep. So. So here's the PTET information that basically what the PTET is still basically a live database. So the data can move around a little bit. But this is the best I can come up with is the tax year 23, which should have been filed with the tax year 23 and should have been over by now. But again, people have 3 years to file their tax return, amended return and things like that. So this number is almost done, so that you can see that they almost claimed the 1.37 billion. There's another 150 million out there, but based on all the state experience, not all of it will get claimed, right? Between 5 and 10% of that will not get claimed. So there's maybe a small number of people out there that will be claiming over the next 3 years, but we have no idea, all right? So the 24 here, the 5 and 10 million, that's what we already get. So that will likely get refund back out this year and next fiscal year. Uh, And since this fiscal year is not over, there's another estimated payment in June and April. We might see this number go up a little bit more in terms of the cash flow coming in. So that's PTED is basically shifting the year in the distribution of cash flow. It doesn't change the tax itself. So if we get more money coming in April and June, say, then more money will go back out, or less final payment, or things like that nature. So that 510 million might change by the time of the April meeting. We might have a new number a little bit higher than that. So last meeting, I comment on going forward, we assume about 250 million to 300 million in PTAT annually. I think that number is not true anymore. So we, in this forecast, we bumped that to about 350 million on an annual basis. So you have basically just a cash movement between the refund, the final, and some of that over the fiscal year.
Then it seemed like in some of your analysis that there's a maybe more significant than anticipated percentage that goes unclaimed.
So the unclaimed right now, you can look at this number, which is about the 150 million, right? So if you take 10% of the 1.37 billion or 5%, that's roughly between 60 and 130 million, right? So not all of it will get claimed, but this is very difficult to tell.
Yeah.
So of that 150 million, the potential of it all go out is there, but it's not likely. Because you have like shareholder from another state, they might not choose to file tax return, thing of that nature. It's like the PTC, not everybody claim it. We don't know. So if you apply the same method, then this 510 million become roughly 400 to 450 million that will be claimed. That's how we look at it. With that, here's the revised forecast for FY 24-25. Sales tax, you can see we didn't change a whole lot. The model come out to be very similar to what the board had projected back in October. Individual income tax, we dropped that individual income tax by roughly 100 million, just because we anticipate refund will go out in anticipation of that PTET amount increase. Corporate income tax, we increased that by 178 million and 153 million based on the two services. Again, that's just the PTET offsetting the refund individual, as you can see. Miscellaneous tax, we reduced that by 21 million just because the last forecast we make an, I wouldn't call it an error, but there was a confusion between at least on my part, on how the interest on investment and the transfer play out. Apparently the interest is in the interest on investment, the cash fund interest go to the interest on investment, which is the above line on interest on investment. If you look at the miscellaneous table, rather than in the transfer in. So I might have to almost double count that amount. So I'm just taking that back out for this in this forecast. So for fiscal year 24-25, it's 64 million higher and 31 million higher based on the two services. 25-26, compared to the board forecast, sales use tax increased roughly by 16 million from ISS and Moody about 1 million. Individual income tax both dropped about 70 million. Corporate income tax increased 81 million and 27 million on Moody. Again, miscellaneous, I'm just correcting for the transfer. So the forecast basically stay at roughly 11 million ISS. 57 million on Moody decrease. 26-27, same story. Corporate increase significantly, 81 million, 46. Sales tax, we dropped it a little bit compared to the board number, 12.5 and 23 million respectively for the two services. Income tax grow a little bit to 13 and 49 million based on the two services. And corporate income tax increased the most. We are catching up on the corporate income tax, so I actually adjust the model outside by increase it a little bit, just so that we hopefully won't be chasing it up forever. And the next few slides, just like the component, overall, you can see the percentage change. It's repeated information, so I might go a little fast here. S&P, you can see the net sale use tax grow a lot over the last few years. We expect it to decline, decelerate to 1.7%, and then go back to roughly 3 and 5% in the out year.
So that projection makes it actually less than the inflation rate,
The
1.7 and 1.5% for this year. So,
yes,
so we're basically saying that we're slowing down in real terms.
yes.
And what impact, well, I know this is a difficult needle to thread, but obviously with increasing consumer prices on taxable goods, some of the initial increase is simply going to be things cost more. And so as
You got more, you will get.
percent, it'll bump our revenue. But do you assess and evaluate on your look at the data, some of that slowdown in the actual revenue growth reflects consumers pulling back on spending as a result of increased consumer prices, and therefore the revenue drops accordingly? We see an initial bump due to inflation, and then as consumers pull back.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on a fixed budget, right, then it doesn't matter what the price is. You buy 3 things before the price increase. Now you can buy less than 3 things. So the total spending is fixed, right? Unless there's a lot of saving out there, but when the saving go up, then you have to constrain to your budget. So that's likely what is happening here.
That's what you're projecting.
Mhm.
is happening.
That is what yes.
So we're buying less goods. They may cost more, but we're buying less
Yes.
goods.
Yes.
Because to make the math work, you have to do it because
Yes.
inflation's higher. So
Yep.
you have to-
So real time you are decreasing, yes.
So the question is, how much are people buying? Are people really buying less?
And in dollars, will they buy less?
Okay, how much do we buy less? I just give me 1 minute. So this is good. Handy. So this morning, the BEA put out a new release on personal income and personal expenditure. So personal income increased by 220 million in January, whereas personal outlay, personal consumption expenditure decreased by 30.7 billion, which is 0.2% compared to last month. So that's might explain some of that.
Income's up, expenditures are down.
Yep.
Is there any then data, again, because on average doesn't mean a whole lot, because we know that both income and expenditures are stratified and they're not linear. So is there any data on where that income, particular consumers, particular individuals, families in terms of income level versus their drop in expenditure, meaning are those on the lower income areas who may not be seeing that increased growth in personal income, are their expenditures pulling back to a greater degree than those who are at the higher end of the income curve?
At least I don't have specific data on that end, but it's clearly impacted, right? Because if you're on a fixed budget,
Right.
it doesn't matter what the price go up, you have to constrain to that budget. But if you're on a high end spectrum, then it doesn't matter what price go up, you still buy the same amount. So it's tend not to offset in the increase, if you will. There's only a certain amount of consumption you can consume in a day, I suppose. And another thing that realized is total consumption might not decrease, but the split between services and non-durable also play a major role in any of this. Because again, a lot of services are not taxed, subject to the sales tax. And we see that the proportional increase in services, spending on services is outgrowing the spending on non-durable goods.
And I assume that the durable goods will get in a normal if this is a downturn, then you're looking at a normal.
Yeah, so the question become on the durable goods side is a lot of people spent a lot of money buying computer, refrigerator, whatever the case may be in 2021 when the pandemic hit. When is that replacement cycle come along, right? That's basically the question. I can't tell you that.
Yeah, it varies by product,
Yes.
obviously. But to John's point, though, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal in the last couple of weeks talking about how 90% of the bottom 90% are not growing as fast as the top 10% in terms of their expenditures. So your point's well taken in terms of what's going on.
Unit cost is a whole lot more important to the bottom 90.
And that being said, there is a counterintuitive way to look at that. That said, you still have to drive to work, you still have to buy food, you still have to do this stuff, no matter what the cost is. There's certain expenditures, but you can push your durable goods expenditures out another quarter. Usually, you can not buy the car, you can not buy the washing machine, the computers. Sometimes you have to buy anyway because the technology is running ahead. So there's a whole question as to whether or not everybody's going to have to buy a new computer for AI.
But the discretionary purchases are, on average, nationwide, I read the same article in the Wall Street Journal, are being done by the wealthy, people that have gains in equities, people who have higher incomes. They're driving that end of the market more so than the other 90%.
Totally makes sense.
And I think as far as for revenue projections, understanding what that distribution is within our tax-paying population is probably vital, because I don't have a guess based on whatever my availability heuristic and biases are, but I don't have a real good sense for what that distribution is between those who are in that top 10% in terms of volume of our revenue versus in the bottom 90%. So that's
So when we do a projection on sales tax, we use total consumption expenditure, right? So it doesn't matter who spent the money, it's taxable. It doesn't matter who spent the money. So we use total consumption expenditure, which is a projection provided by Moody and ISS. They have, which is a model based on income, obviously, but that's what we are using to drive with. The data that you, the breakdown of the 90 and 10% might be interesting to look at, but in terms of projection of tax revenue, it's all aggregated.
Understood that. The question more along the line, though, is I think what John's asking is if we knew what Nebraska compared to the rest of the country in terms of what percentage of the Nebraska population is in the top 10%, and you can probably, I know you can pull that number because it's you got the income tax returns and you can look at that and that's how they measure it. So if you can give us some kind of rough number next time we go through this as to how
I can even give you a better number because we actually subscribe to what Nebraska is. So the slide before on the graph that I showed, those are specifically for Nebraska projection. It's not the national, right? Those are Nebraska specific projection. But let me look into the breakdown some.
Yeah, so we're trying to project forward and we're looking at the durability of the sales.
Yes.
And if we have an actual downturn, then we want to know, how much are we going to be ahead or behind the national average?
Just one last thought. If 90%, again, using the numbers in the journal of people, we'll just say in Nebraska too, are just hanging on financially and not really spending much in discretionary mode, we're relying on 10% of our taxpayers to carry us. If something should happen to those 10%, where the stock market takes a deep dive or some other things happen, we're not spread out as well. Our risk is more concentrated in the 10% of the financial elites to carry the day for us.
Personally, when we do a family forecast like this, the 10% of the highest income population affecting income tax a lot more. Sales tax, not so much. My theory is they can only buy a certain amount of goods. They can't eat more than 3 times a day. They can't buy more than 3 TV if they don't have 3 room in the house. It doesn't matter how rich they are. they can't. I'm not in that boat yet, so that's my theory. When I get to realize that,
But they can eat out of restaurants. There are
Yes,
certain things they
yes.
can do.
yes, they can. They
If they
can.
feel financially they can afford to do it.
Right,
That
but
will affect.
But it's not an increase, it's what they do to begin with, right? So if you are wealthy enough, you're gonna eat out, It wasn't like you start not eating out and then all of a sudden you start eating out. It's in the baseline to begin with, right? So it's not a change in behavior, if you will.
But the opposite could be true, that 90% may no longer be able to eat out.
Yes,
So then the total could come down.
yes.
That's right. Or they'll eat at someplace different from where they eat at,
Right.
which you can see in the numbers too.
Any questions, Coffin? Any more? Not Keisha? Are you
I don't
done?
think you're done.
There's-
You're not done.
It's like, I got a lot more to go.
I'm almost done there. So
Sorry about that.
basically, it's just the percentage of the income tax now. After this 2-year PTET, we should go back to about 3 billion and 3.1 billion, kind of stabilizing after the PTET, assuming there's no outlier in PTET lying ahead. Always a difficult thing to do. Withholding kind of declining at a steady rate just because we are going to cut income tax rate, so the withholding table will get adjusted every January. So just account for the tax decrease in the rate. Final payment, again, after the last year of PTET, we should go back to normal in terms of final payment. Estimated, we decrease it just because of the PTET. Speaking of estimated, this is, if you look back in the February table that I had this is the month that we only get like $500,000 in estimated payment, which has never happened before. It's like 4,000 is like the bare minimum that we can get in any tax category. Refund running higher, so we increased that to 1.281, close to 1.3 billion. Then it should drop back to normal beginning next year when we have less PTC, property tax credit on community college, less PTET money going out. That should account for that. Net corporate income tax, we increase it to 1.138 this year just to account for the PTET we got in December. Growth rate there, we will show a decrease in the out year. Just that's some of the tax cut is also applying for that. Miscellaneous around 300 million in the out year. And that's the total net revenue, 6.4 billion this year. Moody 6.37 billion, and then about 6.96 for next year, roughly about 7.05 billion for 26-27. And that is all I have.
Thank you. Hearing no other questions, we'll go to Keisha.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's weird to change color a little bit. Okay, so I'm just gonna start with my presentation. Of course, this is the standard slide that I just keep including. We're only 4 months from the last meeting, so we're just seeing how things are going. Of course, this year there will be a meeting in April to review final payments that are made in April. So looking at revenue to date, you can see 224 million above forecast. Walker kind of covered this. Through February, I had $88.6 million below forecast at the bottom. That doesn't include today. Wafu's numbers that he included a projection for what the impact of today would be, is the final processing day of the month. There's about $9.5 million in the projection for today. So I think his number is estimating that the actual receipts will be 5 or 6 million below that projection for the final day of the month. So that's where that difference comes in. He has a better vantage point for estimating what might be for today than I do. So no basis to dispute that number. This is a year-to-date by category. And you can see, I mean, obviously this is through January, so it doesn't include the impact of February, but if you include just February receipts through yesterday, sales and use tax, total sales and use tax is about 3.6 million below forecast. Individual income tax is about 18.6 million above forecast, as opposed to the 49 that's shown on the sheet there for through January. Corporate income tax, if you add in February, through yesterday is about 136 million above forecast, as opposed to 173.4. And miscellaneous tax is about $15.6 million below forecast if you add in February receipts. So that brings us to a total of about 135 million or so above forecast to date. And then within 5 or so million, what might happen today, I guess. So I don't want to. Sorry, yeah.
What are the categories in the miscellaneous that are driving it down significantly on the miscellaneous?
Yeah, so it looks like when I looked through February anyway, the reason why February is below by about 14 million, it looks to be in the miscellaneous receipts category, which specifically does not include statutory transfers, interest on investments, or insurance premium tax, because those are all listed separately in the cash flow. So those are all considered miscellaneous tax receipts, but they seem to be relatively close to the forecast through the month so far. So what remains in the miscellaneous tax category is liquor tax, cigarette tax, some various fees and taxes. So there could be some, it potentially could be a timing issue relative to crediting some of that to the general fund. It could be happening on the last day instead of, say, earlier this week. But I don't know that for sure. Okay, so some of the selected factors influencing the forecast relative to macroeconomic factors. Again, Wafu went through this pretty extensively already. I talked quite a bit about farm income at the last meeting. It does look like we did have quarter over quarter decline in personal income, which is attributable mostly to the lower farm income during that time period due to lower commodity prices, crop prices especially, which kind of was offset earlier in the year by higher livestock prices and those sorts of things. It did also indicate that there was potentially a small reduction in property income in the state of Nebraska, not related to wages and salaries or farm income. So that could be impacting personal income growth in Nebraska for 2024. It does look like business investment is projected to increase more slowly in the February baseline forecast as compared to the October baseline forecast. I think that national services are factoring in a certain level of new tariffs that would impact potentially business fixed investment related to steel and aluminum, and also tariffs on goods coming from specific countries. So that was in the baseline forecast, those increased tariffs, which is a factor certainly on business investment. I don't have any specific data relative to this, but it does seem like in past cycles when there have been tariffs enacted, there is potentially, depending upon the rates and if it applies to specific goods, it could have a disproportionate impact on manufacturing and agriculture, which of course are two of Nebraska's largest industries. But because some of the rates and goods it would be applied to are still uncertain, it's hard to speculate relative to that. I do also want to mention, I don't think you mentioned it, that the U.S. national services relative to their baseline forecast for February have included some tax changes at the federal level, including the extension of the TCJA, but also some additional potential tax changes related to exclusion of some overtime and tipped income from income tax, potentially a lower corporate tax rate, some of the a rollback or exclusion of certain credits that have been authorized. Changes to deductions like the home mortgage interest deduction are also possible. Those are not included in the baseline, but they are things that are on the table. And so if any of those additional items are enacted, of course, it would affect the forecast going forward. This, again, I don't want to repeat everything Wafu said. So this is obviously the Fed funds interest rate since 2020. We did see 3 interest rate reductions in 2024. I showed the same chart in October, and it just had the first one in 2024. 2 have happened since then, since after the October meeting that you had. Relative to interest on investments, that does, of course, impact the general fund forecast. In the special session last year, there were a number of funds with relatively larger balances that the interest was redirected to be credited to the general fund. And to Wafu's point about that, when that legislation was enacted, from an accounting standpoint, none of us were precisely sure if that would be credited directly as interest on investments in that category, or if it would be considered a transfer in as the interest was credited to that fund and then transferred to the general fund. And it appears it is being credited directly, so it's in the interest on investments category. For your information, the general fund cash balance as of today was a little over $1.2 billion. We are anticipating, and what is built into our forecast relative to interest on investments is a declining cash balance in the general fund over the forecast period. Basically, the cash reserve fund balance as of last week is $912 million, and the fiscal year ending balance at the end of this fiscal year is projected to be about $880 million. So of course, interest on those accounts are main drivers relative to that interest on investments category. And it just shows, this is from the Nebraska Department of Labor website, and it just shows there has been a slight uptick in unemployment in Nebraska, as Wafu mentioned too. Nationally, it is about 4%, projected to be a little over 4%. Relative to the state of Nebraska, it is anticipated to hover closer to around this 2.8% level. They did list about 30,000 open jobs at this point, which is slightly higher than it has been over the past couple of months, but relative to the national level is still fairly low unemployment rate. So here's where it gets interesting, I guess. So our forecast for fiscal year 25 is different than Department of Revenues. You probably saw that in the one-page handout that was sent out to you. Relative to the national services, our forecasts are fairly similar. S&P and Moody's numbers are fairly similar. What we're seeing here is a slight increase in sales and use tax, which is similar to the Department of Revenue. About 19 million S&P and almost 9 million for Moody's. Individual income tax, I'll come back to. Corporate income tax, we see an increase of about 200 million relative to the increased PTEP payments. That's true for both of our national services, and that is, again, not dissimilar from the Department of Revenue's estimate. Miscellaneous, we also see a decline relative to that interest on investments issue. So those three categories are all fairly similar. Our net individual forecast is, I want to say, about $180 million higher than the Department of Revenue's, using both of our services here, S&P and Moody's. And I do have a little bit of concern about that particularly. I think that, how we've been factoring the PTET into the forecast is generally through individual income tax refunds and less through lower estimated payments or lower final payments. Of course, the amount of PTEP payments that we've received so far this fiscal year has been higher than what we originally projected in October, and we did increase the amount of refunds in our model to account for some of that increase. But if you look at the estimate for individual income tax refunds from the Department of Revenue and from us, they're actually very similar. So even though we did increase the refunds, we still have a very similar estimate for individual income tax refunds. Where the difference really comes in is in the gross individual income tax. Our number on the gross individual income tax is about 200 million higher. And so that is the difference. And I think WAFU's explained pretty much that they have accounted for lower estimated and final payments relative to people claiming the PTEP credit through that method, like instead of a individual income tax refund. And so my concern that I want to address with you is I am not 100% confident that we have built in sufficient changes relative to either individual income tax refunds or lower payments in on the individual income tax side to account for the PTEC credits that will be claimed. So that's my main area of concern here.
I just clarify that when you say concern, you mean that the number estimated might be too high.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I guess I'm glad to hear you say that, or to clarify that you have that same concern, because as I look through this, through all three of the different periods, I just find it interesting that the differences really net out in 25, 26 and 26, 27.
They do.
Not in 24, 25. And so between corporate and individual. So there is something there that seems.
Yeah, I just feel, and I don't know that I have the data to back that up, but I just feel like we overshot, and we didn't properly account for the lower final payments that will probably come in yet here in April. So I guess relative to the increase, at least, that we've projected in individual income tax, the 91 million and the 86 million, I'm fairly uncomfortable with. So
But we should know the answer by the April meeting, right?
yeah.
It'll net out at that point in time, so.
Mostly, yeah. I mean, I think there could be some change relative to estimated payments in June, I suppose, but I think generally, like, it will be addressed in that way through the April data. So going forward, so our forecast for fiscal year 26 is a relatively modest change to the current forecast. Total net receipts 46 million higher on the S&P model and 63.7 million lower on Moody's. The biggest difference here is, again, a distributional question. We have relatively modest change here in sales and use tax and miscellaneous tax. There is an increase in individual income tax and a decrease in corporate income tax. Again, I think that's mostly a function of how we have built the PTED refunds credits into the model. And if you look at the net amount of total individual income tax and corporate income tax, the number is very similar to the current number. It's very similar to the Department of Revenue's number. The distribution, however, is different. So, so that's just one thing to keep in mind. The same can be true, or same can be said for fiscal year 27. Again, it's a relatively modest change. S&P's, the increase is 64.3 million. The decrease in Moody's is 55.6. Again, the big swing is there's higher net individual income tax and lower corporate income tax. And this is the same as fiscal year 26. If you add up total individual and corporate income tax, it's relatively similar to the current forecast and relatively similar to the Department of Revenues. Okay. This just shows the actual numbers of that, of our forecast compared to the Department of Revenue's forecast. So you can see we're about 230 million higher, S&P 250 million higher for Moody's for this fiscal year. And almost all of that is in this net individual income tax category. Again, as I mentioned, it's related almost exclusively to gross receipts, as our refund estimates are fairly similar going forward. If you look at the total difference between our forecasts, it's very small, but there is a distributional impact relative to individual income tax and corporate income tax. So, and I guess I will say we did not make a manual adjustment to the model relative to corporate income tax receipts like the Department of Revenue did. We have been chasing corporate income tax receipts up for quite a while now. I mean, we've been above on corporate income tax and below on individual income tax, like for a period of many months. So perhaps that would be warranted, but we did not make that specific adjustment at this time. So that may be what is being reflected here. So any questions before I switch gears a little bit? No. Okay. So the board asked last time for me to just give a quick update again relative to the federal funds. Not a lot has changed relative to federal funds that our state has already received. So we did include in the appendix in the report. Last time we had only included what the state fiscal recovery funds were. This time we did include a listing for every political subdivision that also received coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds under ARPA. So that's just for your information. The main difference between October and now is there was a little over $1 billion of these total COVID funds that were still unspent as of October. Now that number is 772 million. The biggest difference is ESSER's funds. Those are funds that went directly to K-12 schools, and those expired at the end of calendar year 2024. You're probably very familiar with that. So schools had been spending those out, and of course now if they hadn't spent them, they have expired. So there is about $419 million of the state coronavirus fiscal recovery funds that have yet to be spent. And of course, it is anticipated that those will be spent in the next year and a half, as the deadline for those is December of 2026. And there's about 230 million of local coronavirus fiscal recovery funds yet to be spent. So that is what remains from the 19-ish billion dollars relative to COVID era federal funds.
In your opinion, are those funds legally immune from being recaptured by the current administration should they want to pull them back?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a definitive answer on that. I do know that the original ARPA legislation always had a recapture provision if there was some indication after investigation by the U.S. Treasury Department that the funds were expended on an ineligible use or along those guidelines. So there is a recapture provision that already existed in the law relative to rolling back the funds. At this point, I think it would be very complicated because the obligation deadline has already passed. All of the state and local coronavirus fiscal recovery funds had to be obligated by December of 2024. So now we have contracts, awards, all of those things already. So for the federal government to come in and say they want to reduce the amount that has been awarded, I think will be much more difficult than it would have maybe been prior to that. Yeah. So relative to in Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, again, this information hasn't really changed. We have, of course, transportation funding, surface transportation programs. There did seem to be a question about whether there would be an issue with the surface transportation funding. And as of yet, that seems to not be something that the federal government is planning on rescinding or rolling back at this time. The new programs, there was about $1 billion of new programs over a 5-year period. A large chunk of that, of course, is the BEAD money, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment State Grant. The potential changes that I've seen relative to the IIJA relate mostly to the tax credits that were included in the bill for green energy investments. So I haven't seen as many potential changes relative to some of this, formula funding or grant funding under the IIJA. But certainly the tax credits that were authorized under that act may be changed sometime. The Inflation Reduction Act is a different story, however. Of course, the state of Nebraska had been allocated about $500 million under this particular federal law, over $300 million of which was for a climate pollution reduction grant. And then there's about $91 million for high efficiency electric home and homes rebate programs. And all of these programs have been listed. They were included in the House bill for rescission and repeal. And I think nothing has been passed yet, but it does seem like these particular programs are considered to be they're certainly considering rolling back a lot of these programs. So all of this $500 million is on the chopping block, if you will, relative to that. Most of the federal fund issues that we're looking at relate to ongoing funding. Of course, those have more budgetary impacts than they do tax impacts. But this, relates that these particular provisions relate to something that I had presented to the board earlier about additional federal funds received. So that's an update on that. And I don't have anything else unless you have other questions.
There's a lot of uncertainty at the federal level right now in terms of reduction in force with federal employees and perhaps pulling grants back from universities, other research institutions. And obviously, that's not really factored in here. And of course, it'll probably be determined by the federal courts as to what can or can't be done. But is it safe to assume we really won't know the impact of that until the October meeting?
I think that's very likely. I was on a webinar last week one day about the federal budget changes, and I don't know an exact timeline relative to when that might take place, but it looks like they are looking at for the following federal fiscal year, which would begin in October. So if they pass something later this spring, we could see federal funding changes relative to, our next fiscal year budget like I said, the national services relative to revenue forecasting did factor in some additional changes that were outside of just the extension of the TCJA. But most of the federal funding changes relate more to the budget side, less to the revenue side for the state of Nebraska, so.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? If not, first, thank both of you for all the hard work you've done, as well as thank all of your colleagues in your area for their work as well. It makes our job that much more accurate and easier. So again, thank you. It's that time of the meeting where we ask each of the board members to talk a little bit about their community. And Leslie, if I could start with you.
Sure. The Omaha market continues to thrive and grow. We're not really seeing any signs of pullback or recession there yet. Home rents or apartment rents remain high for a lot of folks. I guess probably one of the challenges we have, and I think we have it statewide, is affordable housing, and I'd call it workforce housing. So it's not just low income housing; it's low, moderate, middle income housing. We've got a shortage of homes for people who want to buy them, but on the flip side of that, interest rates have made it such that they may not be able to afford what they could have afforded a couple of years ago. So that is in play as well, and I think that's probably kind of a statewide issue. But construction continues to go crazy on the commercial side, and with no real let up in sight. I think the biggest thing one of the things that's really helping that is that there are more workers around now to do the work. So there's not quite as many projects, or maybe there's not quite as many projects statewide. There are a number of contractors that used to mostly hang out in Lincoln that are now also in Omaha. So I think that helps.
Thank you. Yes, Chad?
Yeah, similar with the Omaha market. No real slowdown in sight. I think you are hearing a little more concern maybe on the capital side of where things are going with tariffs on steel and things like that. But on the upside, I think there's a hunger in the market on the capital side. There's a lot more people that are coming to us looking for work, looking for projects where a couple of years ago we weren't seeing that. We were seeing they had their plates full. So not entirely sure what that signals, but I think we talked about it earlier, there's concern that's being articulated, but there has been for years now.
Mm-hmm.
And the data seems to show that it isn't slowing down.
Thank you. Tom?
I think I can say a lot of the same things in our area. Been really no slowdown, a lot of activity, both on the commercial side and both on the residential side. Probably looking at the economic development projects that I addressed the last meeting, they're in place and they're building left and right. There will be a couple new ones that are going to be announced here. And so as far as development is concerned, up the Platte Valley, I think it's good. And I think probably the Med Center has been we'll probably have a couple projects in Kearney, and it's real exciting what's happening at the Med Center insofar as Kearney's concerned. We're going to be teaching doctors here next year. They'll have a program for physicians. So, and if you read the statistics, you'll find, and I'm not sure what the exact number is, but 20 of the counties in Nebraska don't have a primary care physician. So hopefully there's a void that can be filled. And of course, it's going to take probably the desire on some students to move out to whatever place it is going to be in Nebraska. And I think there will probably be some funding that comes along, but that's real exciting. Probably housing for the students that come, and I heard it'll be anywhere from 10 to 15, maybe students that are going to need housing, and they want to create the amenities long term that attract students to Kearney. So, and that'll be a real challenge there.
There's also a school pharmacy that's going to be put there too. I read in the paper the other day.
Yeah, and I heard rumors that the School of Dentistry may be looking at coming out there. Heard that from my dentist yesterday. So, and hope he's right there along the line. As a company, we measure inflation every week and send those numbers off. I should send them off to you. It's a very astute way of measuring food inflation. And I send it off to the Federal Reserve every week. And that inflation rate, probably 7-8 months ago was like it dropped below 2%, got up to 2.4 last week, and it's going to push 4.5% this next week. And probably the key contributors to the inflation rate is going to be the cost of transportation. Vendors are obviously taken, and what we do when we sell about 20,000 different food products that go into food service, and then we have there's probably 1,000 that we use in our weekly sample that we put together, and I think the big components are probably good, and we look at landed costs. That's what the cost is to our warehouse, and then we look at the freight charges. And I think basically you're seeing some cost increases from the vendor community, obviously, and the commodity markets will move up and down. And then you look at freight, you look at fuel, you look at insurance, and you look at the cost of equipment. We bought power units, semi-tractors back in 2019 for $106,000. We're paying $156,000 for them now. So the cost of equipment has gone up significantly. And so that has pushed the cost up on everything. And I think we hit probably a period of time, and you can pinpoint it in the sales tax receipts where things were a little bit slower in July, August, September area. And so I don't know what that has to do with what I was saying. But anyway, I think that's where the primary causes of the inflation are coming from. And I mean, it's not extreme. It's not like it was in the 80s by any means, but if it creeps up every month, that will add substantially. And I think the people that are impacted probably the most are the lower income people, and that's what's sad about it. So,
Tom, is the inflation numbers that your company does, is that your cost, or is that what you charge when you send it?
no, we do it on what our landed costs are. So our landed cost is considered manufacturer's invoice price plus freight to our doorstep.
So not really, I would say material change from my report in October, but would have, I guess, some cautionary tale here. Commercial businesses, home demand continues to be good, but on the consumer side, we've really had we've seen a sustained level of consumer loans being past due, credit cards, mortgages, not because people lost their jobs, because of inflation. Just the costs have limited the liquidity that they have. We also have, this is our ag renewal season. We're right in the middle of it. And there's some really tough conversations with some ag producers that were maybe on the bubble before, but you've got drought, you've got some prices that weren't that good, even though the productivity was there. And then you've got some concern about the potential impact of tariffs, which generally don't affect ag positively, but you never know. Livestock, it's great. All of our livestock producers, those are not difficult conversations, but definitely some headwinds in, I would say, in the more rural areas, western Nebraska. And then, it's coming down here and spent some time in North Platte with a banker contact of mine, and having, a lot of activity there. Sustainable beef opening up here very, very quickly, which I think is an exciting economic development activity that will be very impactful. So I think just a cautionary tale, but definitely you can see the impact of inflation on the average consumer.
Zach, have they figured out the housing issue for sustainable beef and the workers?
No, when I was talking to the gentleman I was with about that, they actually think there'll be a lot of commuting from neighboring communities, but they do have a lot of multifamily housing coming online, apartments. And it kind of reminded me, actually, when I was in there, I hope nobody here from North Platte gets offended by this, but kind of reminded me of Denver or some other metropolitan areas where all of a sudden you see a 4-story apartment building. It's like, we didn't have those before. And so I think those kind of solutions are being used to bridge that gap. Not a whole lot of new construction.
Thank you, Zach. I'll give my report too on Kearney, and thank you, Tom, for talking about all the positive things that are going on in Kearney, because there are a lot. But I also have a cautionary tale about Kearney, as you do where you are as well. I was looking at some statistics comparing calendar year 2024 to 2023, and net taxable retail sales decreased 8% year to year in Kearney. Motor vehicle taxable sales decreased 12%. Lodging taxable receipts were unchanged, but if you adjust that for inflation, it went down also a little bit. Although commercial construction was unchanged year to year, residential construction was down. It's probably the interest rates that's plaguing anybody who would like to purchase a home. And we still have a housing shortage in Kearney. We have, as of yesterday, 32 single-family and in-townhouse homes available for sale through MLS or for sale by owners. So if a house comes on the market in Kearney, it's probably as in most communities, and it's priced right, and there are a lot of repairs that have to be done to it, it gets snatched up right away. So it's not that Kearney is experiencing a downside economically right now, but I would say its growth has slowed down appreciably. So that's my cautionary tale for central Nebraska. With that,
I think in greater Nebraska, and I guess talking specifically, if we want to go to our earlier description of that 90%, so not the 10% of people who don't really worry about their budget and are going to spend regardless. I think that 90%, there's a lot of innovation and a lot of positivity about how to make things work in the current economic situation, but I worry that's all going to be very time dependent. And I guess my biggest concern in a lot of rural Nebraska and our smaller communities is we're reaching the potential for a tipping point. So economists like to talk about elasticity of everything. And so right now I feel like, and the sentiment I get from observing a lot of our rural communities is it's like a rubber band, and it has been stretched by high interest prices, and it's been stretched by consumer increases and consumer prices. And it's stretched, and people are accommodating and they're doing well. But the longer those situations continue, I don't like seeing the slower pace of a decrease in interest rates. The longer that consumer prices remain high and continue to bounce, that continues to put more and more stress and strain on that rubber band, if you will. And we're at a point where, for many communities, a singular event can cause that to snap, and then a series of downstream effects for that 90% of consumers. And just to give you some examples of how communities are coping, so I think you won't see it appear in our revenue numbers, but where they're absorbing some of that stress that can't continue onward is, Zach mentioned ag renewal for operating loans, and there are a lot of ag banks, there are a lot of farmers who have absorbed cost increases in equipment and other costs over time. Now they've reached a tipping point where they're having those tough conversations about their operating notes. And agriculture is dependent upon a lot of places other than our local community banks. A lot of their seed is on large seed company financed, and there's more and more seed companies that are seeing greater rates of default, not offering those terms. John Deere Financial is a gigantic lender, and we've seen that trickle down to where some of our large dealerships are laying off staff to cut costs, as we're seeing that change. And then there's little things everywhere. I mean, just an anecdote. When I sold my calves last week, the Sale Barn Cafe will no longer take credit cards. And it's because they're trying to absorb those inflationary cost increases without reducing demand for their 1 day a week where they're having to make their business go. And that 2.5-3% interchange fee that they pay for credit cards is the difference between profitability and not. And when you're stretched that thin, where you're looking at making those kinds of decisions, go through a lot of small towns in Nebraska, and you might pull into a gas station at 8 in the morning and there'll be a sign out front that says, someone didn't show up to work today, we'll be open at 10. You're seeing a lot of small community businesses pulling back on hours to try to save expenses, to try to keep their sales up, keep local communities in the door. So the longer that these interest rates continue, and the longer we have elevated consumer prices, the more and more we're stretching what has been, I think, a fairly elastic economic situation. And, you take an event in a community and things can snap pretty quickly. And, if any of you were paying attention last week when Broken Bow had a catastrophic failure at a power plant on the coldest day in, many years. And we think, oh, that's just a simple thing, but it's not, because there's major manufacturers that went offline, and their mold systems had to go. And that in fact impacted people being able to go to work. And when you have a significant portion of our fellow Nebraskans that are stretched as thin as they can get, and you have a 3 or 4 day disruption in their workplace and their salaries, that can really lead to a cascade of events. The other thing in rural Nebraska that we're seeing, and I'll give healthcare as an example. I mean, we're so excited that Kearney and Omaha and Lincoln are growing and things are moving, but it also has downstream effects that rural communities can't cope with. When one of the large health systems did a really cool thing for RNs and said, we're going to make this massive base rate salary increase for all the registered nurses. That's awesome for Kearney Regional and Kearney, and that's awesome for Lincoln. That's awesome for Omaha. But if you're in Albion or Broken Bow, you can no longer afford nurses when you're in hospitals, which in some cases are the largest employer in their community, that are at 3-4% margins. So in Nebraska, again, we talk sometimes about a tale of two Nebraskas, but that great positive growth in the urban centers and availability does have some unintended consequences on the fiscal viability of our rural communities that we have to think about and address. So I'm positive that everyone is coping and doing very well, but the longer we continue to have elevated interest rate and consumer prices, whether that shows up in April or not, whether that shows up next October, but those continued elevations will continue to put stress on certainly on greater Nebraska.
Thank you, John. Steve?
I always hate to follow John because I always seem like I'm living in a fantasy world over here because I'm so optimistic, but that's naturally my world. I think both Fremont and Omaha, the two places where we have businesses, are doing well. Obviously, since we're doing radio, we're kind of on the cutting edge. The advertisers usually are the first ones to tell us if something's going wrong. So far, they're not. So far, we're having record years. The interesting thing about it, though, is as this goes on, everybody is saying, "Well, I'm worried about next year. I don't know what's going on. There's chaos here," and we continue to climb these walls of worry. We're always worried, but we tend to plan around that worry and try and figure it out. So I'll be the optimist. To John's point about interest rates going down too slow, well taken point. But the other side of it, though, is to look and say, wow, if the economy does start to turn, there's still some interest rates that can be, you can snap the interest rates at that point in time and start taking them down. And hopefully that would provide some gas to the engine, if you will. I don't know if there's anything in these reports that, as we look at what we're going to do today and make our projections out, I think we're going to find out that February projections are going to be interesting, but April projections are going to be the ones that are accurate because we're going to know then what the PTET and all due respect to the differences between the two groups, we'll know in April what the answer is, I think. So we can give our projections today and then kind of hope that they're right, and then we'll find out the answer when we come back in 2 months, which is kind of crazy that it's only going to be 2 months, but by then we'll see that April 15th number, and that'll make a big difference. That's all I got.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add anything? If not, it's time to create a forecast. Everyone should have your 3 forecast sheets out, and we'll take the gray one first. Fiscal year 24, 25.
Just say
Are we just doing sales or what are we?
I'm sorry. Yes, sales and use tax.
So the high is 2,600,000,000. The low is 2,500,000,000. The average 2,514,000,000.
Mr. Chairman, I'd move 2,000,000,005.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Any discussion?
Have we ever had that close to a consensus? One number in our.
So it's 2,000,000,005. Roll call.
Mr. Karp,
yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Meisgeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Miss Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henning.
Yes. Motion carries. 2,000,000,005. The next item will be individual income tax.
Mr. Chair, could I ask, I don't know if I can ask this, so it's not a fair question, just tell me, but I assume this is a safe space where I can ask.
It is.
Because of the conversation around the PTET and the relationship between the individual and corporation, could we do both like at the same time? It just would feel weird if the individual was one way and then it's done and it's already approved. And then it kind of locks in, at least for me anyways, it locks in the thought process on corporate. And so I'm wondering if we could do them together, if it'd be opposition.
Let's see what the rest of the board.
Fine with that.
It's
No
fine.
objection.
Okay, so we'll do individual income tax together with corporate income tax. Is that? And then we'll do miscellaneous separate. Okay?
That's my question.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Where can you do that at the next meeting?
Mr. Chair, I move 2,450,000.
Second.
To the point earlier, do we want to wait to see the corporate entered before we?
That's fine with me.
Yeah.
Sorry, John.
That's okay.
Okay. So the high on corporate is 1,150,000,000, the lowest 960 million, the average 1,110,000,000.
Could I ask what the average is without the 960?
Without the low one, it would be 1,135,000,000.
So I'll go again, 2,450,000 for individual and 1,135,000 for the corporate.
Okay, so we have a motion for 2,450,000 for individual and 1,135,000 for corporate. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Karp.
Yes.
Motion carries. Last item for this fiscal year would be miscellaneous taxes.
High of 355 million, low of 335 million, average 349.7.
Mr. Chairman, 350 million.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for 350 million. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Karp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis.
Yes. Motion carries.
So the total for fiscal year 24-25 is 6,435,000,000.
We have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I move we set fiscal year 24-25 at 6,435,000,000.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and second for 6,435,000. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Karp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier.
Yes.
Motion carries. Fiscal year 2025 to 2026. We'll start with sales and use tax.
You shoot the fish in a barrel. Just sales and use.
Yeah.
So they're all the same.
It's an easy.
There's the answer to your question, John.
Uh,
This
well,
is the time where we're
Mr.
more in
Chairman, I
agreement.
move 2,601,000,000. I retract my motion.
2,000,006?
2,600,000.
Second.
Just to make certain. We have a motion and second for 2,000,006. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis.
Yes.
Mr. Meisgeier.
Yes.
Motion carries. We'll next do individual income tax and corporate income tax.
I know you're gonna make me think about that.
Mhm.
Yeah, obviously, Matt and John knows all the trouble. Roll.
So, oh, is there one more? Yeah, I'll put it, yeah, we'll go ahead.
Looks like some couple of
Oh,
numbers.
sorry. Okay, so on individual income tax, the high is 3.2 billion, the low is 3.1 billion for an average of 3,157 million. On corporate income tax, high of 925 million, low of 830 million for an average of 885 million.
Anybody want to jump in?
I would move on individual 3,150,000,000 and corporate 885.
Second.
Was that 885?
Yes.
So we have a motion and second for individual at 3,150,000 and corporate for 885. Any discussion? Roll call.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Meisgeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine.
Yes.
Motion carries. Last item for the fiscal year 25-26 will be miscellaneous taxes.
Okay, the high is 330 million, low of 315 million, average 319.7 million.
Mr. Chair, I move 320.
Second.
Motion and second for 320 million. Roll call, please.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Meisgeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson.
Yes.
Motion carries. And the total is?
The total is 6,955,000,000.
I'll move that number.
We have a motion for that number.
There you go.
6,950,000,000.
6,955,000,000.
6,955. And do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp.
Yes.
Motion carries. We will now move to fiscal year 2026, 2027 sales and use tax.
Actually, can I have mine back? I wrote the wrong number. I apologize. Thank you.
High of 2,750,000,000, low of 2,700,000,000, average 2,707,000,000.
Mr. Chairman, I move 2,700,000,000.
Second.
We have a motion and second for 2.7 billion. Roll call, please.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine.
Yes.
Motion carries. We'll now do individual and corporate income tax. together.
Still separate. None of that's made my business.
So on individual income tax, the high is 3,240,000,000, low 3,140,000,000, average 3,197,000,000. On corporate income tax, high of 900,000,000, low of 750,000,000, and the average is 818,000,000.
Mr. Chairman, I'd move 3.2 billion on individual and 825 million on corporate.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Roll call, please.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen.
Yes.
Motion carries. Miscellaneous taxes would be.
We did the 3,200 for the first one and then 900 for the second.
So those are all the same too.
Make it easy. Who wants to jump in and make a motion?
I'll move 300 million.
Second.
Have a motion and second for 300 million. Roll call, please.
Mr. Maiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis.
Yes. Motion carries.
The total is 7,025,000,000 for fiscal year 27.
7,025,000,000. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Maiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank all of you for helping us with the forecast. Next item is our April meeting date. The last Friday of the month is the April 25th. The last calendar day of the month is Wednesday, the 30th. I've been told that staff is open to whatever days we would like, and whether we could be in the afternoon too as well, as opposed to morning. So let's just have a conversation as to what works for people and what doesn't.
I have a meeting on the 25th that lasts all morning.
Same. The afternoon's open on the 25th, and the 30th, I could make work anytime.
Same.
Yeah, I'm open on any date, anytime.
I've got the same morning issue, but I'm open on the afternoon on the 25th or anytime on the 30th.
So if the 29th and 30th works for all of us, do you have a preference? Is the 30th too late to get the information to you? I know it gives you more time to give us information.
Yeah, it gives us more time to get you information, and it'll be fine whichever day you pick.
Okay, so let's go with the 30th, Wednesday first.
That might be pushing it for, because it is late, for everybody to digest this information and get it back out the door
Okay,
Right.
to the people that need it. So maybe the afternoon of the 25th.
I agree.
okay, on the Friday.
Yeah.
Okay,
Because really, when it's an April meeting, it's the 15th that's kind of really guiding us. It's not so much got to get all the way to the end of the month.
The 15 day, we basically have to show up here and present it. The booklet we send out will not have any of that information. Right. We just don't have time to get it.
It does take a few days to process the,
It's not like the money show up on 15, we have to up and mail
Right.
before the.
okay,
But
so,
either way, we will show up here with the information. It's not, we will not be in the book.
so you don't really care whether it's the 25th or the 30th for that matter?
No.
And the 25th is Arbor Day,
Correct.
it
right?
is.
Okay, and that's not a problem for you and your employees?
I will make it work, see, that is what you
Okay.
prefer.
But the mornings are out on that day, I heard.
Correct.
So would the afternoon, 1 o'clock, those of you that have commitments already in the morning, would the afternoon at 1 work?
It'd have to be later, actually. The 30th would work a lot better for me, but, because because then you can just put it anytime during the day, but,
What time in the afternoon on that day? Or you
I
don't
can
know?
be here too, but that presses, that presses everybody else then it's, I feel real bad about doing that.
2 o'clock doesn't bother me at all. I mean,
It
Doesn't
work.
bother me either.
It's okay
It's
with you. You're the one who's got the drive.
Now I feel really bad. Making Zach drive back. It's,
We'll make it a fast meeting. So, Tom, what do you think?
I'm fine. 2 o'clock.
Friday, the 25th.
Yeah.
At 2 PM. And there won't be a problem getting a meeting room.
Should not be, no.
So let's have a motion and second for that date and time, so we can get it officially
Make
registered.
a motion. We do it on April 25th, 2 o'clock PM.
Second?
We have a motion and second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson.
Yes.
Motion carried. And Emily, can you let the two members that are here know what the date and time is in a separate email? Last item I have is just, we call it public comment. Give anyone in attendance an opportunity to ask any of us or staff any questions. So I'll open it up and be quiet for 5 seconds to see if anybody raises their hand. 5 seconds are up, so thank you. And with that, how about a motion and second to adjourn our meeting?
So
So moved.
Motion, second, roll call.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis.
Yes,
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine.
Yes.
motion carries. Thank you very much. Drive safely home.